So today we're doing a presentation on the refrigerant phase out in Washington State, specifically as it relates to HVAC equipment. I'm so excited to have everyone here today for the discussion. Presenters today are going to be Eric Vandermeer, our Chief of Engineering, myself, Reed Rushing, Director of Mechanical Engineering Group, and Austin Bonas, who's a senior engineer for us, doing a lot of the research and diving into the actual language of the rulemaking. So a little bit about Rushing. We have 7 studios: MEP, lighting, energy, sustainability, and commissioning. And our agenda for today, we have about 25 to 30 minutes of content, so plenty of time for Q&A at the end. We're going to go through the Department of Ecology rulemaking process, the timeline for the phase out of each equipment type, the new refrigerant management program, and then availability of equipment with next generation refrigerants. All right, Eric, take it over.
Okay, so thanks, Reed. Eric Vandermeer with Rushing. So today, we're talking specifically about Washington and Washington State, and what's different about this refrigerant phase out. So past phase outs have been, based on the entire U.S. federally mandated. So in 1996, we phased out the CFC refrigerants. And in 2010, we phased out the HCFC refrigerants, which would include R22. So it was officially 2010, the answer to the trivia question. And then, by shortly after that, the U.S. did pass legislation to do the HFC refrigerant phase out, but that was repealed by the federal administration in 2027. And so what that prompted was, states then moving forward state by state. So this is going to be really our first refrigerant phase out where it's on a state by state basis, which is adding a layer of complexity to this for equipment manufacturers and equipment vendors and engineers and all of us, right? So everybody's state the legislation that was passed in each state is slightly different, and so then these rules for each state are slightly different. And so in 2022, the U.S. did ratify the HFC phase down federally, and so that process is also starting in play at the federal level. So lots of change. So like I said, back in 2021, the state legislature did pass a bill that requires us to phase out the HFC refrigerants. This is kind of the second phase, as we'll see, to this phase out. And so Department of Ecology within the state of Washington is the one that regulates this. And so they have been working since then and had several stakeholder meetings last year and early this year to start developing the proposed rule. And then on July 13th, that proposed rule was filed. So the CR 102, as we call it, was filed, the second step in the process. Tomorrow is the formal public hearing for that rule. So we'll have details on that. And then next week, the public comment period ends. So if you think things need to be clarified, this is the time to do it. From there, they'll take the public comments and file a permanent rule, a CR 103, towards the end of this year, with the goal of that going into effect essentially by January 2024. So kind of in the last few steps of this rule. So let's pop to the next slide. As we said, you can show up to the meeting tomorrow and give oral comments at the public hearing, or you can submit your comments via email or via their site by next week. And so you can go to either their site or click on these links after we send this out to get more information. So like Reed said, we're going to be focusing on the HVAC equipment. This rule does also cover refrigeration equipment for things like walk-in coolers and freezers. It also covers, blowing agents for insulations, and other things, but we're going to be focusing on the HVAC equipment today. So up in the top there, we're putting our equipment into 5 different categories here. So in the top in green, we have the rule that's currently in place, which covers chillers in table 1. And so that is already a rule that's in place and essentially isn't changing substantially with these revisions. And that effective date is still January 1, 2024. So we've known about that for the last 3 years or so and have been preparing for that. And so now in the blue, we have kind of our typical HVAC equipment, which is the room air conditioners, the VRF systems, and then the other category. And those proposed dates of 2024, 2026, and 2028. And then there's been, like I said, Rushing and others have been participating in this process over the last year. And so now what we are seeing is clarifications in how we deal with these heat pump chiller products, air to water heat pumps, water to water heat pumps, and such. So there have been proposed revisions to Table 1 to cover these for the space heating products. And then based on our discussion with Department of Ecology, the way the legislation was written, the rule is not extending to service or potable hot water equipment. So our air to water heat pumps or air source heat pumps for domestic hot water applications are not part of the current legislation and are not governed by these rule revisions. So that's a brief look at that. We're going to kind of go through some of these definitions and how the rule is structured. It's key to read their definitions and understand them because they're not necessarily intuitive. And so we're going to provide some highlights on that. But this rule is applicable to those that sell, lease, rent, install, or otherwise, bring products with refrigerants into the state. There's requirements for those that own and operate facilities. And so we'll kind of walk through how these rules are going to be governed by the Department of Ecology. So we have the definition of air conditioning and air conditioning equipment. This is kind of the broadest definition that does encompass both new and existing equipment. It encompasses kind of all of our HVAC equipment, including chillers. It's not to be confused with the definition new air conditioning equipment, which we'll talk about in a second. So there's definition of high GW refrigerant. Again, this could apply to both new equipment or existing equipment within the state. And so this is defined as any refrigerant that's a CFC, an HCFC, an HFC, a PFC, anything with a GWP greater than 150. There's a definition of prohibited substance, which is the 4 tables that we'll talk about for different equipment types. And then there's the definition of global warming potential that's been added. And so this is based on the IPCC AR6 document that was published in 2013. I know this has been a question among some of our vendors, which version we use to establish these GWPs. Is it based on the
AR5?
Excuse me, AR5.
Yeah.
What did I say? 6? AR5.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's based on AR5 from 2013 with the 100-year GWP value. We have heard, other countries around the world moving on to the AR6 document and those values, which change some of these GWP values for refrigerants. And so we'll highlight some of that information later, but it is clearly defined now which version of of this climate change report that we're referencing. Data manufacturer. So again, this is a Department of Ecology rule that doesn't align with our 2015, 2018, 2021 code cycle process. And so this is based on when equipment is manufactured. So equipment like chillers and rooftop package units that come filled with refrigerant, those pieces of equipment are stamped with their manufacture date, and the Department of Ecology regulates that they have the proper refrigerants when they enter the state. And so the things that are pre-filled and aren't topped off with refrigerant out in the field are based on that data manufacturer. For things like split systems like VRF or mini splits where you're adding refrigerant to that system, it's based on the date when that refrigerant circuit is completed in the field and you complete the refrigerant installation. So that's a date you're going to have to track in your construction schedule to understand, are you going to have that system installed and filled with refrigerant by that phase out date or not? And so that's something to track there. The effective date of this chapter, there's language in this that uses that term. It's not specifically defined, but that is the date when this rule goes into effect. So it's essentially 31 days after that CR 103 is filed. So if it were to be filed on December 1st, this would essentially mean this rule goes into effect January 1, 2024. So that exact date will be determined based on the date of the CR 103 filing. And then we said there's 4 tables as part of section 040 and the prohibited substances. And the primary ones we're going to be looking at are the chiller changes, which include the air to water heat pumps, and then the new air conditioning equipment changes. So let's see. Let's keep rolling through these. So we're going to start with the chillers. So the existing definition of centrifugal chiller and positive displacement chillers have been removed as part of this proposed draft rule. And we have a new definition of chiller. That definition includes kind of all of our air source or water source chillers. It does not include refrigeration equipment for like walk-in coolers and freezers. It's covered under table 2, but it does also include those space heating heat pumps. And so we'll take a look at the next slide to understand what this looks like. So again, the stuff in green is the current rule for our centrifugal chillers and positive displacement chillers. And those are now the list of refrigerants that we can no longer use as of January 1. So no real change there. The clarification happens in the bottom part of this table under air conditioning, where they now have sections for centrifugal chillers that do heating or centrifugal chillers that do heating and cooling. And so that's, and these again apply to new chillers as defined. So all new chillers and new heating and cooling chillers. So that's the clarification for the air to water heat pumps and the water to water heat pumps. What you won't find here in the exemption table is any exemptions for buildings that have already been permitted. So that's a potential public comment that Rushing is going to be providing. The only exemptions from this on the air to water heat pump side is for military marine vessels and human related spacecraft. And so, right now, if you have an existing permit from 2018 code and you haven't manufactured that chiller, or you haven't, not the chiller, the air to water heat pump, the heating or heating and cooling type device, it would need to have a non-HFC refrigerant by that January 1, 2025 date. So that's chillers, we're going to move on to the air conditioning equipment. So again, this is the definition of new air conditioning equipment, not to be confused with the definition of air conditioning equipment. And so there are three types here. These do not include the chillers in table 1 or the refrigeration equipment in table 2, but include the room air conditioners, the VRF systems, and then the all other category. And so there are kind of slightly different rules for new facilities and whatnot there. So look at room air conditioners. Again, January 1, 2024 is the effective date, unless you use the exemption from table 3, which is a facility that has new equipment but has a building permit issued in 2023, essentially. So if you have a building permit that's issued during before the start of 2024, then you would be able to use that exemption there. And so this covers all of our packaged terminal air conditioners, packaged terminal heat pumps, and we have a question whether this covers larger things like vertical terminal heat pumps or whatnot. I don't know, Reed, any thoughts, or you want to expand on that? No.
Well, if you take the time to read that full definition of room or of PTHP, you know, I read it that a VTHP could fall into the same category. So that's a clarification that we're planning on either asking tomorrow or making a public comment on.
Okay. So we'll hit the VRF systems again next. So the VRF systems, variable refrigerant flow systems, are defined as having, essentially an outdoor condensing unit with multiple indoor evaporator units that serve those. So if you are a simple mini split that just has a single outdoor unit with a single indoor unit, you would be part of the other category. But if you got more than one indoor fan coil on that, then you're part of the VRF category. And so that date is again January 1, 2026, but you're not looking at your data manufacturer. You're most likely looking at the date you fill that system with refrigerant. Again, there is an exception for building permits that are issued in 2023. And so that doesn't say technically in mechanical permits, it says building permits. So one of the challenges we have on one of our projects is that we're potentially going to get, we have a mechanical permit on the project. They're not going to get their building permit until 2024, it sounds like. And so we essentially would have to mix codes for that project unless they can get the system installed and filled by 2026. So again, potential for public comment there on what type of permit we're tracking and whether that's based on the application date or the effective, the issue date of the permit. Let's go on. So then we have our other air conditioning category, which includes everything that's not in the other equipment types that we've talked about, things like rooftop package units, split systems that are 1-to-1, and water source heat pumps. And again, we have till 2028 with this equipment. All those equipment are limited to a GWP of no more than 750. And so we'll look at next what refrigerants we're going to start moving to. Again, this is the recap of the 5 different categories that we're putting equipment into and what table you look at. But let's go ahead and jump to the next slide, Reed. So what's been happening on the mechanical code side is the mechanical code has been revised now in the 2021 version to have new rules for these refrigerants. So we know that we're now classifying the GWPs per AR5 for the 100-year category. We know that we need a refrigerant selection that's less than 750. And we know we've been using R410A for most of our packaged equipment and split systems. We know we've been using R134A for most of our for a lot of our chillers and whatnot. And so those two refrigerants are off the table because they have a GWP that's more than 750. And so what we're looking at is moving equipment to R513A for some of the chiller products, or a lot of the manufacturers for the packaged equipment and split systems are moving to R32 or R454B. So as you can see, R32 has a global warming potential of 677 as classified by AR5, but per AR6, not part of our rule, it is now going to being reclassified to a global warming potential of 771. So certain manufacturers have been moving to R32, others have been moving to R454B. So that's kind of a point of that you'll want to look at when you're selecting equipment. A lot of the chillers are moving to other refrigerants like 1234YF or ZE, which have very low global warming potentials. But as part of this process, you see a lot of these refrigerants are now classified as A2L. So that's a new classification for the 2021 code. It breaks out the A2 refrigerants into two categories, one being flammable and one having a lower flammability limit. And so with that, we're now having these mildly flammable refrigerants, either in our rooftop package equipments or in small package equipments or in our split systems, which have refrigerant piping throughout the building. So anyways, let's move on, Reed. You want to talk about this one?
Sure. So the 2021 mechanical code, as Eric mentioned earlier, basically put in place some new rules for A2L, this mildly flammable refrigerant piping. Basically, any piping that travels more than 3 floors is now required to be in a shaft that's ventilated to outdoors, either mechanically ventilated or naturally ventilated. You could also use double wall refrigerant piping, but assuming that's the least cost-effective way to achieve the new requirement. Any piping that's running in walls or within structure that's located less than 1.5 inches from the nearest edge of the framing member requires a shield plate of like a certain thickness, a certain gauge required. So those are kind of the two main impacts for refrigerant piping. As Eric noted earlier, we can find ourselves in kind of a weird situation needing to use these 2021 rules for projects that are already under the 2018 mechanical code. So there might be some code modification requests that we need to be coordinating with jurisdictions to be able to use those rules under mix and match code cycles. Anything else you want to add on this one, Eric or Austin?
Yeah, just generally like running vertical piping through buildings in wall cavities is kind of a thing of the past, right? We're putting things in shafts that are ventilated to outside now. We are, if we have potential for leaks, we do have these mildly flammable refrigerants that we are moving between our indoor and outdoor units. So, quality install is definitely a must. Line sets that are home runs are definitely the preferred way to run this wherever we can. Yeah, and then there is one cost savings, I guess, also in the 2021 Washington State Code, which is it has been clarified that we can run piping down the corridors as long as it's above a ceiling. It doesn't have to be above a rated sealing anymore. So that has been clarified in both the state and Seattle codes.
The other thing to consider too is the RCL limit for these flammable refrigerants is very stringent. So just more things to consider as well.
And it's very hard to ignite the A2Ls. Go on
Yeah,
YouTube, look for videos. So
I was gonna say there's some good YouTube videos on people trying to ignite A2L refrigerants. All right, let's pass it to Austin for the refrigerant management program.
Yeah,
Look
thanks,
on
Reed.
YouTube, but maybe don't try it at home. Let's maybe caveat that.
Yeah.
yeah, we don't want to be releasing refrigerants into the atmosphere. No.
Yeah. Don't encourage that. But the other big thing that was added into this new proposed filing was this refrigerant management program. Moving forward, they're looking to get vendors, distributors, building owners, facility managers all reporting and managing refrigerants moving forward. And that's not just affecting new equipment, it's also affecting all existing equipment and refrigerants. So for building owners and facilities, they're needing to pay new yearly fees, which are relatively low, but it's based on a high GWP, meaning over 200, a GWP of over 200 and 50 pounds. So if it hits those two criteria, there will be fees associated with how much charge you have per equipment. Slide. And then on the rest of the systems, on the facility management and installer side of it, there needs to now be more of extreme leak inspections and detection and monitoring requirements that are going to go forward. So this will trigger an existing system or already installed system that needs to be recharged or replaced. This will be triggered under that requirement to be now monitored and have verified leakage requirements. This law or this rulemaking is establishing a allowable leakage amount and rate. And so now they're just tracking this and looking to keep long-term records on how these are performing. So 50 pounds for a typical BRF system is usually going to be looking at about 12 tons or larger than 12 tons. So for a lot of mid-rise, low-rise buildings that are using VRF, that's going to start being triggered with that requirement. And then on the last part of it, for more distributors and vendors, this rulemaking is still requiring more kind of paperwork and record keeping, needing to disclose all sales and all potential refrigerant types to the Department of Energy or Department of Ecology, as well as giving sale receipts and managing all reclaiming and retrofitting jobs. So when there is a project that needs to be designed going forward, we're also going to have a plan or a retrofit plan or replacement plan that's put in place for these kind of future refrigerants.
So kind of overall refrigerant management program is the DOE is going to set up a huge refrigerant tracking database essentially and it's going to include, each facility with a 50-pound refrigerant system or higher. Is that a good summary, Austin?
Yeah, and it may be a reason for engineers to limit the sizes of their systems going forward, to just avoid that threshold when it comes to monitoring, or avoid that threshold when it comes to yearly fees or reports.
So that covers a brief synopsis of the rule. Obviously, you can dive into a lot of the details We are going to talk a little bit about what's coming next that's not part of this rule and what we're seeing in the industry right now. And so we have heard of other jurisdictions and countries that are moving faster than Washington, of course. We've heard discussions in California about potential legislation coming down to limit the GWP to 10. And so, you know, a lot there is thinking that this HFC phase out to just get us below 750 is, maybe maybe a 5 to 10 year thing in Washington, maybe less. There's a substantial amount of money obviously being invested in equipment from both a UL listing and a AHRI listing. It's just a tremendous amount of effort that has to happen to convert all this equipment to these refrigerants. But some people are thinking, beyond this and really, how do I go below 10 as my threshold instead of 750? And so part of that is because these HFC and HFO refrigerants, they are forever chemicals in our atmosphere. And, some of these refrigerants break down into, 20% or 100% forever chemicals in our atmosphere. So there's lots of movement for health and wellness to regulate these refrigerants, and things continue to change quickly in the market. We are working with, several, let's pop to the next slide, Reed. We are working with, several manufacturers that are looking at natural refrigerants for HVAC. So companies like Flow Environmental are using CO2 as a refrigerant for space heating. It's a much more complicated process than for the domestic hot water heating. Subcritical and transcritical refrigeration cycles, and higher, more industrial rated components, stainless steel, better compressors, things that cost more, but are using a refrigerant that has a GWP of 1. And so this is kind of a decision point to be thinking about in your project. Are you looking to go to the next refrigerant that may be phased out in 5 to 10 years? Or are you looking to pick a natural refrigerant that will never be phased out? Let's keep moving. And so, we have gotten this question, like, what is the COP since we're operating at higher pressures? There's a lot of good data out there now comparing the efficiency of different products. And so, work with your vendors out there to look at some of these next generation products that are coming online. There's also a lot of federal incentive money to develop these products right now. So, stay open to using different products, and really it's a decision point early on projects on how you're going to deliver them. So lots of products, like we said earlier, that are on the market and coming to market. We hear new products every week. Now it's, which projects have the next generation refrigerants for both the space heating and for the service hot water heating. It's a lot for us that we're trying to track on a weekly basis, but it's an exciting time in the industry, and we're seeing new products that can do things all the time. Keep moving. Austin, did you want to highlight on this a little bit?
Yeah, so we've been looking at a variety of product types. We reached out to vendors, manufacturers, and we're starting to see a pretty large trend that very small package systems like monoblock heat pumps or PTAC units, or very large systems, chillers, air-to-water heat pumps, water-to-water heat pumps, they all have options or can at least be ordered now for the near future with future refrigerants. Where a lot of the market is still lacking is mini splits and VRF and package rooftop units, partly because the language in some of these rulemakings are, allowing for there to be some time before that stuff is required, but it's also up in the air where some of these GOWP thresholds will be limited. But in the near future, we'll be able to get a lot more options for those kind of systems. And then with potable systems, we're also just seeing a lot of options coming through that are available now or orderable at least.
So with that, we started kind of brainstorming our list of things that we would like clarified in the current proposed rule, the CR 102. There may be other comments that you have, so we can kind of open up to questions and dialogue about this. We hit a couple of these early on. You know, the no exceptions for chiller heat pumps on the base heating water side based on existing permits. You know, being based on just the building permit. We didn't really talk about this one. 4-pipe heat recovery chiller, if it's controlled only on the chilled water temperature side, you know, is that a chiller? Is it a heat pump? Is that a 2024, 2025? There's some other things, you know. So if you're, you know, we recommend that if you have questions when you review this rule, you know, get them into Department of Ecology. You can show up to the public hearing tomorrow and hear more about what folks are concerned about. But yeah, get involved in the process if you can. So did we answer most of the questions on the way through? I saw a lot of them popping up, but I couldn't keep track of them all. So how do we want to do question and answer, Reed?
I'm just scrolling through some right now.
We do have one over in the Q&A module, and apologies for some folks. We weren't aware that some folks IT disabled that function, so we'll certainly try to come up with a more consistent game plan for the future. But we do have one over there that did not get addressed from Bonnie. This program is adminned by Ecology for now, but it's likely to move to the SBCC, State Building Code Council, in years to come. And then in parentheses, I think, your sense. So any comments on Ecology versus SBCC in terms of administration of refrigerant rules? I'll set maybe to Eric.
Well, when I was on the SBCC, the first phase out for the chillers that happened, that was all handled by Ecology. It was the legislation, you know, the legislation was written that the Department of Ecology was managing this. It was not the State Building Code Council. The State Building Code Council only develops codes. They do not enforce any of the codes for the state. And so I would not think that this is going to be transferred to the State Building Code Council itself. But anyways, that's just my random opinion. I don't have any official data on that.
Awesome. And then I'll also just comment, a couple folks have asked if we'll be posting slides. Just to confirm, yes, we'll be posting the slides and a recording of today's session on our website. And anybody who signed up for today's register will send out an email with that information linked as well. So you'll get a notice as that gets posted.
As far as the question on differences between states, yeah, right now there are a lot of differences between states. Like we said, the way legislation gets written in a state is the way, you know, the rules have to follow the legislation typically. So depending on how detailed or open that legislation is how those rules get developed. We have not done a deep dive on Oregon. I know there's a lot of changes happening in California. Your equipment vendors are going to be, you know, good resources for understanding, you know, what's available when. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I haven't looked into Oregon myself, but last time I looked into California, they're a little bit ahead of our timelines that our Department of Ecology is proposing. So like P-tax, I know was January 1, 2023. They're kind of, I think, like a year ahead for a lot of them.
Yeah, we've heard air to water heat pumps are all going to be lumped in with the chillers in 2024. I'm not sure what they're tracking for VRF and for the other equipment right now.
So Dwayne had a question. He said, so grocery store refrigerant leakage will become public record. So that will actually, I guess, Austin, the management program that doesn't distinguish between air conditioning equipment and refrigeration equipment, it'll be all of it included.
Correct. Yeah. So yes, potentially. I don't know if someone's going to be able to read their records, but
So
yeah.
they're gonna have like some pretty awesome data about, leakage rates. I mean, not awesome in the fact that there's leakage, but just that there will be so much available data. And then Dwayne also noted, are there changes needed to the Washington Mechanical Code? I mean, I think beyond what is captured in the 2021 code language, Eric, do you think that there's anything additional?
Yeah, so a little background there. So the legislative bill that was passed requires essentially the mechanical code to be updated to have the rules for the non-HFC refrigerants, for the A2L refrigerants. So yeah, those we have to have essentially a 2021 mechanical code in place to go along with the requirements for the HFC refrigerant phase out. So that work has been done and is in the code.
And Ryan Gorley had a good question. In retrofit applications, if you're using an A2L refrigerant, would you be required to build out the ventilated mechanical shaft for the new reefer lines?
Yes, our understanding is that you're going to have to install any of the reefer piping per the current mechanical code. And so, yes, I mean, the other thing to note with VRF is the pipe sizing is very much tuned around, well, the manufacturer determines all the VRF pipe sizing, and that's based on the refrigerant selection. And there's no kind of drop-in refrigerant to replace R410A and have the exact same characteristics. So, potentially you're replacing the existing piping system through the building and then finding a way to add those ventilated shafts when you replace it. Now, that to be said, if you have an existing R410A system, you're going to be able to get replacement compressors for that system for a long time. You're going to be able to get R410A refrigerant for a long time. But at some point in the life of that system, you likely will need to upgrade to whatever the next generation refrigerant is. So it is a much bigger design decision to install that up front. It's much easier to replace a packaged chiller on the roof that has a new refrigerant than it is to replace the whole system throughout your building.
All right, unknown user dropped in. What about adopting ASHRAE 15-2 by state of Washington SBCC? When will the SBCC do this? Sorry if you've already covered it. We have not covered that yet.
Which version? So ASHRAE 15 is the refrigerant standard, and I'm trying to remember which version is now in the 2021 IMC. So a lot of this change happened at the model code level within the IMC. There's a couple of clarifications that Washington and Seattle have made to clarify a few things, but most of this is, yes, model code language. And so the version of ASHRAE 15 that's adopted for the model code IMC is the 2019 version of ASHRAE 15. Not sure if that answers the question or not. So.
And there's been a number of other items that have gone into the chat with questions and have been responded to in the chat. So hopefully folks have been following that. But are there any questions that we missed? Does anybody have anything else? Feel free to raise your hand and chime in too. If you feel like your question didn't get addressed, or if you'd like to verbalize it for the rest of the folks joining today, feel free to do so. Just that's straightforward and simple. That's all the questions there could be, and they've all been answered. So.
This is going to be the first rushing webinar that ever gets cut 10 minutes short.
That's because I wasn't in charge, right?
All right. Well, we got a hand now.
Yeah, I'll chime in. Ryan Trickett with the University of Washington. So you spoke about it a bit earlier, and obviously you don't have a crystal ball, but some of us that purchase large industrial scale water source chillers, like 1,000-ton plus units, are struggling with the possibility that 513A is essentially a Band-Aid and will be phased out as well. And our typical life cycle for a piece of equipment is 25 years plus. So the challenge we have is today when we go to manufacturers and say, I want a ultra low GWP chiller like this, they look at us and say, sorry, that's not available. I'm just curious, like, what is the legislation or what are the things that we should be paying close attention to out in the market with regard to, is 513 going away as well? Or will go away? I don't know if that question or discussion point makes any sense, but figured it would generate some conversation.
Yeah, it's so maybe go back to that list of refrigerants, I guess. So, you know, in Europe, they have moved to propane as a refrigerant. GWP is 3 for outdoor rooftop equipment. I don't know if that's going to happen much in the U.S. There's been a few incidents with that, I think. You know, there are large water cooled chillers that operate on like R1234YF or ZE, which have low global warming potentials. Yeah, so there are options out there. Yeah, I'm trying to remember which. Oh, maybe it was 513. I'm trying to remember what we did at. And then the CO2 as a refrigerant is not. Yeah, I don't know what the largest tonnage we're seeing in that is. Right, Austin, it's like 200 tons.
We're seeing in a chiller, we're seeing like 3,000 tons chiller or 3,000 pounds of charge in a 1,000-ton chiller, and 513A is available in that kind of unit. It's based on the compressors and what really they're using, but
yeah, if you were trying to go to a GWT less than 10 with a large water cooled chiller, do you have I don't have a sense of.
We're seeing this 1, 2, 3, 4 ZE is what I'm seeing as a potential chance. There's some from a couple of manufacturers, Smart and others, that are using that.
Okay.
But maybe another important clarification is that this GWP isn't a set unit. It can change. That's why like Europe is changing their classification of R32. because of that.
So it sounds like we have a valid concern of purchasing large-scale 513A equipment at this time.
Yeah, it'd be hard to change from 513A to a different, low flammability refrigerant. That's a different type of compressor. So it would be replacing that unit in the future if that is exchanged out. But, that's not in any legislation or rulemaking yet.
So yeah, you can see 513 is a blend of 1234 YF and 134A. And so, yeah, if you want, there are options out there. It might be a different type of chiller, but there are like you were saying, a large smart chiller with multiple compressors on it. You can get in, what was it, 1234 ZE? Is that right, Austin?
I do believe so.
It's hard to keep all these track of all these different refrigerant numbers.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
I see Dwayne has his hand raised.
Yeah, just to follow up on that last one, is it going to be a not too smart idea to go to R32 at this point if you're going to potentially end up with a refrigerant that is going to cost you a lot of money to recharge or is going to cause trouble in a not too distant future? Is AR6 going to be adopted, do you think?
Honestly, I have no idea, Dwayne. We've there are advantages of R32 over R54B, or there's pros and cons there. R32 is a pure refrigerant. It's not a blend of multiple refrigerants, which has some advantages from how it's dealt with. But yes, this is a discussion that's currently happening in Europe. And there's a lot of manufacturers that have moved to R32 for either chillers or other equipment there. So yeah, we're definitely dabbling in this and not experts in where all this equipment is going to move to. It is something we're talking about. Do you want to move to something like R744 CO2 that's a natural refrigerant? It's a talking point on projects, right?
But just like
Yeah.
410A, we're not, they're not going to require you to strip out that unit right away. If they make that change, you're still going to be able to do repairs and recharge it over a long period of time.
Yeah, and I would just add that it's a consideration that has to be, a part of every system selection, on every project, that, these are new requirements. Is there risk associated with putting large refrigerant circuits in the building and needing to do the refrigerant management program? And, all of that is certainly a consideration that stakeholders need to be aware of when they're making those systems decisions.
We're officially into the particularly wonky portion of the presentation where people start dropping off.
Well, if there's nothing else, then let's call it a wrap. And as we mentioned earlier, we will follow up with this slide deck and link to the recording. So thank you everyone for taking the time to join us today. Have a great rest of your day.
Great job.
Thanks all.
You keep up the good work.
Thanks, everyone.